Right guys, a little bit of a different video today. So we're going to be going over altitude training for grapplers. This will be part of a two-part series. Part one, we're going to be going over repeated sprint training. And then part two, we're going to look at some recommendations for if you're injured and how we can use altitude training to accelerate that return to play process. Now this is actually part of the research that I'm doing for my PhD, so I could probably talk on this all day, but for the purpose of the video, I'm going to keep it short and to the point. So make sure you stay around for the rest of the video. Okay, first things first, what is repeated sprint training in hypoxia? Well, repeated sprint training can simply be defined as all-out maximal effort sprints performed in hypoxia and interspersed with short incomplete recoveries. Now, key term there I use hypoxia. Hypoxia scientifically just means the low partial pressure of oxygen, but in simple terms we can just refer it to as low oxygen availability. And it's often associated with the mountains, hence why you see people go on training camps at these higher altitude areas. An extreme example of this would be Mount Everest. What we usually do to do this is actually use some kind of normobaric hypoxic chamber, such as what we have at our university, or you can use some kind of mass-based system as well. Now, a couple of key things here. Number one, intensity. So the intensity has to be maximal. In order to get the physiological changes and adaptations we're looking for from this type of training modality, we need to be hitting it super hard. So it literally has to be all out. Obviously we mentioned hypoxia and how that simply can be referred to as that low oxygen availability. And then finally, incomplete recoveries. So again, these are short effort sprints, but we also need to be making sure the recoveries are pretty short too. Now we can have a little bit of a play around with this. We'll go over some sort of training practical applications and key takeaways for how we can actually apply this a little bit later on. But recovery should be under 60 seconds. Typically we work from anywhere from 1 to 2 to 1 to 6 work to rest ratio. And then finally here, this can be done on treadmill, it can be done on a cycle or a bike, it can be done on a rowing machine, it can pretty much be done with any sort of implement. I will say, after doing these myself, it's a lot easier if you have access to things like watt bikes rather than the rower, which takes a little bit just to actually get the machine moving. Okay, so how does this work? Well, you might be thinking, Josh, you says hypoxia means that low availability of oxygen. How can that be beneficial when we're exercising? And in most cases, it's probably not going to actually help us in terms of that acute exercise performance. Our performance is probably going to be impacted a little bit. And if we think of a lot of endurance exercise, or if we think of sort of longer sessions, this is absolutely the case. And even when we're performing many sprints that we might see in some of the repeat sprint protocols, you'll see a drop off in performance, and that's completely normal. But why is repeated sprint training and hypoxia actually beneficial then? Well, number one, when we're performing sprints, we're actually getting increased recruitment of the fast twitch muscle fibers. So those larger muscle fibers, we're actually going to be recruiting more of those during the exercise. Fast twitch fibers actually have a better capacity to extract oxygen. We combine this with hypoxia, which causes what we call compensatory vasodilation. So simply means there's going to be an improved flow of blood to the tissue. When we add the two together, we can expect that there's going to be additional benefits as these fast twitch fibers are actually able to utilize that oxygen a little bit more effectively. So two main things there, improved recruitment of fast twitch fibers and also the ability to extract that oxygen at a greater extent from those fibers because of this compensatory vasodilation. Now there are a few other little bits, but as I said before, we're not going to go into sort of the nitty gritty too much. I'll happily link in the notes below some articles that can actually go through the exact mechanisms. Okay, so this is the bit that you guys have probably all come for. We're going to go over some practical points on how we can actually implement this type of training into our daily practice. So first off, I mentioned what repeated sprint training in hypoxia actually is. I mentioned some of the key mechanisms to how this can actually be beneficial. Now, what are the actual benefits for performance? Why am I trying to sell this to you? So repeat sprints actually have some really cool benefits for actually improving our repeatability during high intensity efforts. There's been a number of studies that have shown additional benefits when combined with hypoxia during repeat sprints for improving power output, particularly that ability to sustain power outputs over a number of repetitions, along with a reduction in fatigue during high intensity activity. So what are the training recommendations? Well, from a volume perspective, pretty low volumes of anywhere from 2 to about 4 sets of 4 to 7 repetitions. But again, these are going to be all-out efforts. So the sprints are only short, anywhere from around 5 to 15 second sprints. And they're going to be performed with short recoveries. So typically less than 60 seconds. Work to rests of 1 to 2 to a 1 to 6. If we're looking at trying to improve our power outputs in those initial sprints, then we want to go with a higher work to rest where we're having, say, 6 second effort followed by a 30-second recovery, for example. So that there would be an example of a 1 to 6. And if we're actually trying to go the opposite way and we're trying to improve our recovery between those sprints, then maybe we want to work sort of a lower work to rest, for example, a 1 to 2. We could be doing 10-second efforts followed by 20 seconds recovery. So again, we're stressing our ability to recover nice and quick between those efforts. And finally, again, rest periods, we want to ensure we're resting long enough between sets. Again, anywhere from about 3 to 5 minutes is pretty good. Now, we want to be doing this a couple of times a week, so typically 2 to 3 times a week, for anywhere from 2 to about 5 weeks is what's been shown in the literature. Now, altitudes, we're going to be doing simulated altitudes of 2 to 4,000 meters. So pretty moderate up until high altitudes. The sweet spot here was probably around 3,000 meters. It seems to get most people in the right zone for this style of training. Now, you might be saying, Josh, I don't have access to a altitude chamber, I don't live in the mountains, and I don't have one of these mass-based systems. How does this work? How can this apply to me? Well, we have an option here. We have what we call the poor man's altitude. This is what we call voluntary hypoventilation at low lung volumes. Now, that's a really big mouthful and sounds super complex. VHL has become relatively popular over the last couple of years. What it refers to is end expiratory breath holds, or in other words, when we're breathing out, we're exhaling, we're going to be holding our breath. And then we're going to be holding that for as long as possible whilst performing super maximal intensity exercise. And again, this can actually give us some really cool benefits such as improved power output and delayed fatigue during high intensity exercise. That's a really simple way of breaking this down. It does seem a little bit more complex when you actually read the studies around it. And if you're actually interested in trying it out, let me know and I'll link you up with some of the studies and sort of my take on how it can actually be implemented into your training. As always, guys, thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. If you did, I hope you enjoyed. Make sure you like, comment, save and share.